Okay, my clock is showing 8 o'clock. The Transportation Appropriations Subcommittee will commence. We have our esteemed commissioner with us. I would like to take a point of personal privilege before we get started to thank the guy that's not here, our governor. As the presentation came and as we dive in on the numbers, there is a pretty substantial commitment to transportation across this great state, and I thank the governor and his staff for the recognition of that. We've got our esteemed transportation chair here, Chairman Jaspers, who I think would probably echo those same sentiments. We do want to thank you. The other point of personal privilege, we're going to have a prayer before we get started. Our vice chair of this committee is of the Smith caucus. Vance Smith broke his ankle. He had surgery, and we're going to issue intercede with the master for our friend. And the last one, and it's not going to get in a prayer meeting, but I had one of my senator friends, Senator Ramon, his brother-in-law is in exceedingly serious condition in the hospital, and I'm going to offer prayer for him as well. So bow with me if you will, and we'll get started. Dear Heavenly Father, you are so gracious and kind to us when often we are so undeserving. This morning we mentioned a couple of names. Lord, I pray that you'll be with them. Lord, I pray for Senator Ramon's brother-in-law specifically as he's fighting for his life. Lord, I pray that you be with his physicians, be with the family. Be with us this morning as we seek to be good stewards of the resources you've entrusted us. Lord, as we begin this session, as we begin this meeting, there are things that we may disagree on. I pray that we will disagree in kindness and in grace. Help us remember why we're here and who we represent. This we ask in your name, Jesus. Amen. So, without further ado, I'm going to turn to Commissioner McMurray. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good to be everybody this morning. And Mr. Chairman, I did notice that joint appropriations, when we shared the budget news, you did have a smile on your face, as did I, acknowledging the robust nature of the amended 24 budget. So we're very excited about that. Just a few housekeeping notes. Angela Whitworth, our treasurer, couldn't be with us today. This is Selena Reardon, our director of finance. She is short for her tenure at GDOT, and Kirkley Renwick behind her will be replacing her. And of course, I can't do any budget thing without George Christensen behind me, of the administrator of the Office of Budget Services, and we're always thankful for Abby Day. Thank you, Abby, for the great partnership that we have with this committee and the Transportation Committee as well. So with that, I've got a handout in front of you, and we'll just jump right in to the amended 24 budget. And I'm going to try to click. Maybe it.
The volume's not online either. Angela's saying she can't hear it online, so I don't know if you.
Okay. All right, there we go. It clicked. So just as we start, always remind everybody when you look at the GDOT budget, you're going to see 4 budget programs consisting of motor fuel. The Transportation Trust Fund shows up, which is 3 components: the annual alternative vehicle fuel fee, the annual heavy vehicle impact fee, and the hotel fee. That all constitutes the Transportation Trust Fund. And then the Transit Trust Fund, which sounds similar but different, is the rideshare user fee, 50 cents per trip or 25 cents per trip if you're multi-people in one vehicle. And of course, state general fund. So those those four components are what drives and makes up the revenue for our budget. On the next slide, you can see this is the National Highway Cost Index, and I talked about this at Joint Appropriations Committee and thought, Mr. Chair, it'd be good to take a little deeper dive into this, and this actually has one more quarters of data into calendar year 23 than I showed at Joint Appropriations. And so what the National Highway Construction Cost Index is basically Federal Highway Administration's reaching in and pulling data from actual projects bid across the United States. And they're looking at the major commodities like steel and asphalt, aggregate, concrete, electrical wire, things like that, the major components of project bids. And they index that basically on how bids are coming in sort of nationally. And this very complicated chart layers in the National Highway Construction Cost Index with the other indexes like CPI and also PPI, the Power Producer Index. And then the last one is the ECI relating to Employment Cost Index. So it's a really neat overlay to sort of see what's going on globally as it relates to inflation, Power Producer Index, which is all about energy and the cost of energy, and then also jobs as it relates to the Employment Cost Index. And pretty simply, what you can see is that the cost of doing projects is outpacing all these other things. You can see that PPI, the little green dash line, was outpacing all of that up until about the second to third quarter of 2022. It's been declining, but the Construction Cost Index has somewhat maybe plateaued, but has not seen a decline. And of course, you heard from the economist last week on CPI, where it's somewhat has maybe leveled off. So the point of this is just to show you that it's costing a lot of money to do construction projects, and it really just has not subsided, and really don't see that subsiding. It's just sort of been leveled off. The other thing that really drives this is the barrel of oil. The price of a barrel of oil drives a lot of these things in the construction industry because it takes energy to produce and manufacture no matter what it is, asphalt, concrete, steel. So there is a correlation there to a barrel of oil. On the next slide, this is how does this relate to Georgia? Now that's the national look on the previous slide. And I'll just show you these trends as it relates to asphalt resurfacing, the primary focus of state of good repair that we do across the state. And you can see this chart goes back to December of 2020, and it follows the low bid, which is the blue line, in our engineer cost estimate, because our engineers do cost estimates to make sure that we're tracking and understand the bids that we receive. And so we always want to compare the bid we receive to our engineers' estimates to decide if we can award the job or not. So this chart just shows you over by quarter the number of projects and in the increase. Now, as you can see, 80% increase in cost. And the way this is broken out, if you look to the left, you can see that's about $150,000, a little bit more than $150,000 per mile per one lane. So this is not a two-lane road. This is broken down to just one lane. 12 foot wide is a little over $150,000 a mile. So just think about that. So that's how this is broken down. So it's average of over 350 projects. So, and when we looked at 350 projects over this period back to 2020, it was $1.1 billion of bid over, going back again, that's back to 2020 up until October of 2023. So that just reinforce cost of doing business. On the next slide, we're going to go into urban widening and look at the total project cost. And not all urban widening projects are the same, but this is a comparative analysis based on the cost per mile of construction to widen in an urban area. And so this represents about 18 projects with $550 million of investment for those 18 projects. And you can see that the increased cost for urban widening projects is 118% as compared back to December of 2020. Now, also might add, not shown on this chart, is when you're in urban widening, often the cost of the right-of-way is very close, if not more, than the cost of construction. But as you can see, the blue dot, if you translate across, it turns into being about $19 million a mile in an urban area to go from a 2-lane road to a 4-lane road. So $19 million a mile in an urban section. On the next slide, I'll talk about bridges just a little bit. And this is based on, you talk about a house, you talk about $1 per square foot when you build a house. We look at bridges on $1 per square foot as the deck area. So if you think about the bridge deck, we do $1 per square foot on that. So this does not include the grading work or anything else associated with the bridge, just the actual how much does a bridge cost per square foot, and just those things associated with the bridge. So again, going back from December 2020 to October 2023, we see a 61% increase in the cost of bridges. And this was 139 projects, again, a little over $1 billion of bridge work since back to 2020. And you can see those costs have continued to rise. All right, so that's just a little background of the budget programs, sort of the cost of doing business, sort of the state of doing business, and then how do we going to take these revenues that have been proposed by the governor's budget, and how do we turn those into our budget items? So on this slide is the budget summary. It's about page 100 on HB 915. If you're looking at the HB 915, that's where the summary is. You can see there was a $57.9 million add in excise. That is basically an adjustment based on interest earnings from DOR. And then, as Mr. Chairman, as you talked about, a robust add of $1.506 billion to state general funds. And so that is robust, bringing the total amended budget year to $3.954 billion. So that's the revenues in the budget. And now on the next slide, I'll show you where those dollars are basically used. This slide is a bar chart of a summary, if you will, of the budget. And you can see from the highest budget categories to the lowest on the right. And let me just walk through those just for a moment. We've taken several budget programs and combined them here for illustrative purposes. Capital projects, the biggest line there at $2.485 billion, is a combination of our capital construction program, our capital maintenance program, local roads, and the new freight infrastructure program, of which I'll discuss later in the presentation. So that constitutes about 63% of the state budget. The next highest category is our routine maintenance category at $527.9 million, or 13% of the state budget. That is doing the preventive maintenance, the upkeep of our roadways and roadsides across the entire state. And then you can see LMIG is next, and I'll take a deeper conversation on that. General operations actually is a combination of several programs, including our administration, data collections, the planning functions, program delivery, that's the people that are actually delivering the projects, and traffic management. So we've got several things bundled together there we just called general operations. And then you got bond debt at $109 million, intermodal, payments to CERTA, and then payments to the ATL. So just again, a sort of a illustrative view here of sort of where the revenue's going to be used. And as you can see, if 76% or more of the budget's directly into capital spend, if you will, of taking care of the roadways and roadsides. Everything else is making preparations so that we can do that. On the next slide, this is going to be more along the lines of HB 915, and we're following in the order of HB 915. And we've taken the information out of the budget and tableized it there so that you can see in the second column the various fund sources that total each of the budget programs. So you have motor fuel, transportation trust funds, state general funds, etc. So the first one I'll highlight is that capital construction budget that has an add of $659 million of state general funds and $8.5 million of motor fuel. In the budget item, it says that it provides funds to expedite the department's existing project pipeline. Very importantly, because of what I just showed you of the increased cost at the national level and what we're experiencing in Georgia, this absolutely will help us to deliver the projects that we have underway now and help maybe bring some of the projects that we've had to cascade into the future back to closer to present day. We're dealing with a lot of increases, those cost increases, and so this will definitely help. I mean, it is fantastic. We have a meeting with planning this week to sort through the projects that we all have in front of us for the rest of this budget year in '24, and then what is in '25 or in beyond, and how we may can, again, utilize this $659 million to keep things moving. One other complexity that I share with you is if you track the national news, obviously the federal continuing resolution at the federal level certainly does have an impact on our ability to deliver the federal funded projects. Some of this money absolutely goes to match federal dollars. We have about 1.5 billion of federal dollars that we match, and then also we have state-funded capital projects. The continuing resolution, as you know, goes to March 1st, and the way that works federally is we are giving a daily pro rata share of our $1.5 billion. So you get 1/365th out to March. And so as we get projects ready to be bid, we're actually authorizing projects now for projects that would be bid in March, which is beyond the March 1st date. So we're in this period of time now where there's not enough federal money to continue to advance our federal program fully. So we will be watching closely and looking at what we can do. The federal government does allow you to use your money, and then they will reimburse you, sort of pay it forward. But that comes with that's using our state dollars. So we are in this period that usually continuing resolutions into January we can handle pretty good, but when you get into March, it becomes very delicate balance, again, to try to continue to advance projects but not overextend ourselves using our state funds to carry the federal program. So that's just one other little thing to throw in the mix as we look at how we deploy these additional resources. We'll keep you posted and more conversations certainly to Chairman Jasper's Transportation Committee as we go through this year. And a little more perspective too of what these increased costs means. On the federal program, it has to be physically constrained over 4 years. That's what we call the State Transportation Improvement Program, or the STIP. And so as the planning division and our delivery folks looked at the 4-year STIP, which was just approved late last year, we had to shift 183 projects or so in the STIP, because if you're financially constrained and project costs go up, then you can't deliver as many projects as you thought. So what we always do is just move it to the next year. If we can't deliver it this year, we move it in the next year if it's ready. So inside those 4 years, we had to move 183 projects to the right on the timeline, if you will. And so that's a big impact. That's where that $659 million will absolutely help us move back.
183.
Thereabouts.
Wow.
But it's just a cascading effect. So if you think about the again, physically constrained federally 1.5 billion a year times 4, and then you put a 20 to 50% increase overall in project cost, then that's the delta. So again, all right. So with that, I really wanted just to highlight that one on this page. Again, I'm not going to try to go through everything, just hit the highlights. On the next slide is the LMIG program, $200 million add to the base of $212 million. There was also a $5.7 million add of motor fuel, which is representative of 10% of the actual excise collection, which brings the total add to the LMIG program of $205.7 million to a total of $418.5, almost $418.6 million. I remind you that the local LMIG grant is the Local Maintenance Improvement Grant, and this is a formula distribution out to our cities and counties based on road miles and population that is desperately needed. Cities and counties are experiencing the same thing we are. They're no different. So this was a wonderful add that will go a very long way. We have a meeting this week with ACCG and GMA to discuss the rollout of this. We are in the midst of rolling out FY24 funds now. We usually finish that up by February, end of February. So we anticipate doing another call for projects for them cities and counties between now and FY25 LMIG going in. So this is really a big shot in the arm for our cities and counties, and will go a very long way.
Commissioner, I must tell you, so as you were going through that, I thought I was in church. I heard amen over here to my right. City man knows how important this is, and it is awesome. From all of my county folks, and I'm sure everyone here has mentioned from the city and county, this is important, and it's awesome.
I've yet to meet a city or a county that said they had all their resurfacing needs taken care of. And maybe from time to time, you guys may have a ask as well for a little more LMIG money. So this will go a long way to satisfy that. Let me just head down the list. Everything else here mainly is dealing with the cost, the $1,000 COLA. The governor presented last year. Thank you very much for that, and for the governor, and for that goes a very long way. And of course, some adjustments for GTA and insurance and things like that are reflected in our budget. I will note program delivery at the bottom of this. Program delivery is exactly what it is. If you recall, a few years ago, we changed the name of that to get it more reflective of what it is. This is the people, being engineers, project managers, environmental, right-of-way. It's the people that are doing the work to develop the capital program to deliver these projects. And so this is going to go, the $4 million of motor fuel is going to go to help us in recruitment and retention efforts. We have 27 project managers that are assigned almost 1,200 projects. And so we're trying to backfill there to help and try to work with retention. And then over in our P3 division, on some of the bigger projects that we are doing around the state, if you think about 16 and 95 in Savannah, or the I-285 and I-20 East interchange, and 400 and 285, these bigger projects, we have 21, or about 17 people that are project managers there that have $2.6 billion under construction and $5.3 billion in the pipeline. So we're going to work on retention and recruitment efforts in our program delivery folks. On the next table is rail. Mr. Chairman, at Joint Approach, you asked about rail, so I thought I'd share a little more detail with you today. You can see just a small add of $2.3 million there to bring a total to $10.6 million. And on the next slide, let me detail what that $2.3 million turns into. For the additions, we have a couple things going on there. One is we have responsibility as state DOT to have oversight of MARTA's heavy rail system. So we have execute on behalf of the Federal Transit Administration our oversight duty for safety of the rail program. So there's a small amount that goes toward that. There is over $1 million of the add that goes to one time to match federal Railroad Administration's dollars to create a state rail plan. So that is a federal requirement that we develop a state rail plan every 5 years. And so it's time to redo that. So we have $1 million, a little over $1 million, that goes to matching Federal Rail Administration dollars to develop that plan. And lastly, a little bit of a complication I'll get to next is about $1.2, $1.3 million for our staff to actually administer the rail program. And again, that's out of state general funds. If you look at the slide there, you can see that there's the locomotive diesel tax program. And that was defined in law just a couple years ago. And now that those dollars are being appropriated, those are the dollars that come from the sales tax of diesel that goes into railroad locomotives. Mr. Chairman, you asked specifically, how are we doing on getting our state-owned short line up to Class 2 standards? We're at the 75% mark, and which is out of 530 miles. So the remaining 25% is about 125 miles that still need to be brought up to Class 2 standards. That is 286,000-pound train car up to, and I'll say that, up to 25 miles an hour. And that doesn't mean 25 miles an hour. It means you might can get up to 25. Now, strategically, we're at a point where we've invested in the rail, but we're now focused on the trestles and the bridges that are on those rail lines. So you can have those areas, but you still may have a slow warning or load restricted bridges. So strategically, that's sort of where we probably need to flip and look at now continuing to invest in those bridges and trestles, as well as trying to get the rest of the last 25% up. It's a little more strategic to do that. We've identified a little over $17 million of need in '24 on 5 of the state short line railroads, mainly for trestle, some bridge, some rail improvement as well. But let me go back now to this locomotive diesel tax. So if you look at the budget program, as you can see that the majority of the funds in the program, $8.3 million, are locomotive diesel tax funds. That code section of locomotive diesel tax 48878 requires us at the department to develop a formula based on the operating miles of the railroads, of all railroads, not just state-owned short line. So if you can see, the Class 1 railroads, CSX and Norfolk Southern, control and operate about 67% of all the track miles in Georgia, the short lines of 33%. So we are actively under a call for projects from all railroads, short line and Class 1s, to deploy that $8.3 million based on the formula. 67% of the dollars will go to the Class 1s, which is about $5.5 million, and $2.7 million will go to short lines. So that is sort of the breakdown of that. So obviously on state-owned short lines, our rail folks are working with those rail operators on the state-owned short lines to be in alignment so that when they submit their application, we probably agree with it. But the 3.3 or $2.7 million is a little bit short of the 17.3 we've identified. But just again, a little complication in the budget. Previously, before this change in law, it was all state general fund coming to our rail program. And so now it's got a dedicated fund source, but we do administer it to private rail operators as well. There is language in law about public benefit. We have to make sure that state funds are used for a public benefit. So probably more than you wanted to know about the rail program.
But it is revenue that they generated.
That's correct.
From the diesel fuel tax on.
That's correct. Okay, next slide. Highlight a few more things. I wanted to highlight the routine maintenance budget. When we showed that stacked bar chart, that was the second tallest bar on the chart. We had to add a motor fuel of about $32.4 million. The state general fund was dealing with the 2.2 or 2.1 million was the add for the COLA, or excuse me, the $1,000. And so I wanted to highlight that is in the joint appropriations, I talked about the cost of, again, maintenance contracting. And so $32.4 million is going toward the increased cost of materials and our contracting costs where we do things like pavement preservation, like filling the cracks or patching or maybe doing some overlays here and there, guardrail repair, sign repair. For some reason, trucks like to run under our signs and knock them down. So things like that. So just a few data points. In fiscal year 20, we contracted with the private sector for routine maintenance. We did 238 contracts. The average cost of the contract was about $428,000. In fiscal year 23, we're only able to do 139 contracts, so that's 99 less. The average cost went from $428,000 to $620,000, almost a $200,000 increase in per contract cost. Now, these are not always apples to apples. This is more like oranges and tangerines because what we size and scope. But the point is, we're doing less projects at an increased cost. That's why we're adding $32.4 million back into routine maintenance to try to help address those increased costs. And I might add the contracting method that we use is a very good one. It's sort of an on-call service. If all of you decided that you wanted to do some pavement preservation, we sign you up. You're all approved contractors. And then when we say we need to do some pavement preservation, we send you an email blast to all of you. You get an email blast, you put your bid in, and then we take the lowest responsible bid. And so it's very efficient and very quick. Our districts administer that, and it's a very great process, and it's been really good for small business as well, because it's usually small businesses that are doing that, and that's been a fantastic. And I don't have the data point, but we've got literally thousands of businesses, most all of them a small business, signed up to do that work. You see some tree trimming, things like that, guardrail repair, all those it's been a really good program.
I would like to thank you for that because that is a major shift that you've made to get more locals involved and less big, more local, small. It really is good. Out of that budget, what is the biggest the bucket in that routine maintenance, you think?
So probably, and you help me with this, it may not be right, around half, maybe a little less than half is our DOT employees, is just labor. So you got labor, materials and supplies, equipment, and then contracting. So the biggest bucket though is labor.
Okay, thank you.
Then materials after that. Okay. Next, let's see, I had traffic management circled there. Again, just a little bit about traffic management. I mentioned at joint appropriations that these dollars are doing really a couple things. One is to help our HERO program. Back during this last calendar year, midsummer or so, we had to reduce our hours of coverage. We used to work 24/7, and we dialed that back, and our coverage of how many miles we covered as well due to staff limitations. We were down to around 30 heroes. We are fully staffed at about 130 heroes. And so we just physically could not keep up, and our response times were not adequate. We backfilled some of that coverage area. Well, we backfilled all that coverage area with CHAMP, which is, again, an outsourced effort that covers the rural interstates. But they were able to staff up to sort of backfill that. I'm excited to say that we've now have heroes of about 80. Now they're going through training program. You can't just come in and start to work. We go through a training program to get you road ready to be out on the road, but we're still need to work on retention. It's very similar to what law enforcement and first responders and fire and EMS have seen on retention. It's a hard, dangerous job, and so we're going to continue to work on retention. The other aspect of this, too, is just a few years ago, we joined the 811 program, and so we've seen a huge uptick in responding to utilities. 811 is when you call in and need a utility located. So since we've joined that, we've seen a huge increase in our having to respond to utility call-outs. So part of that will help consultant services to help us do that work. Okay, next page, which is slide 14. Transit, also, Mr. Chairman, I know that came up during the Joint Appropriations Committee, so I was going to talk about the Transit Trust Fund in just a moment. And then lastly is the freight infrastructure, that new program, and I'll talk about it on the next slide as well, that additional $641 million. So let's turn to the next slide on 15. Just a little bit about public transit in Georgia. This is a really good news story update. We have 130 out of our 159 counties now with some form of public transit in it. What GDOT's responsibilities is administering the Federal Transit Administration's grant programs for 5 grant programs across the state, excluding the 13 counties in Metro Atlanta, of which the Atlanta Transit Link Authority, or the ATL, is the designated recipient of federal funds for this 13 county metro area that we're sitting in today. And so as we look at our budget, you can see that their transit trust fund, of which I talked about on the second slide there, of the rideshare fee, has become the major source of funding for transit across the entire state. And that's seeing a big benefit. So on the next slide, let me show you how those dollars, those transit trust funds, are being delivered beside what's required for us to match the Federal Transit Administration dollars. So what we did going back 2 years now, 2 budget years, is with the Transit Trust Fund, we developed a program very much like the Local Maintenance Improvement Grant, a formula-based application where transit providers can seek these Transit Trust Fund dollars to do more transit, not to supplant or replace their existing budget, but to enhance it so that they can do things like buy new vehicles, upgrade facilities, upgrade their technology, do things that basically we follow the definition of Federal Transit Administration's capital projects definition. So we established this program. This is the formula that you see, that out of the dollars, 55% of the dollars go to counties, obviously formula distribution, and that's based on the county population, based on 2020 census. And then there's a 25%, you can get 25% more if you're doing multi-county or regional transit. So that was one of the things that we wanted to do, encourage more multi-jurisdictional crossing boundaries, because usually people's trips don't stop and start at some border. So there's a little bit of a bonus there. And then lastly, 20% of the dollars are going to counties whose household mean income is under $45,000. So the counties that are already challenged financially, this is again a little bit of a equity boost for those counties that are challenged financially to help them deploy transit where they may need it most. So a very successful program. We've rolled out 23 and 24 this year is well underway. We had the $23.6 million of Transit Trust Fund. 12.6 million of that went to the ATL, the 13 county region, for the ATL to utilize, and 11 million is funding the Transit Trust Fund program, roughly 11 million in FY24. So this is a C-level change in the state's investment in transit across the entire state, and it's been wildly successful from our transit operators. So that was just a little bit of that. Next slide is the new program, the freight programs, which we're very excited about. As at Eggs and Issues, Chris Clark mentioned the 91% growth in tonnage of freight out to the year 2050. Now, 2050 sounds like a very long ways away. But in transportation talk, it takes us a long time to do big projects, literally a decade or so to do big projects. So, and I always remind people that 2050 is almost equidistant back to 1999. And we were worried about our fax machines in 1999. Seems like yesterday. So 2050 will be here before we know it. The other thing I shared at Joint Approps, sort of interestingly, in the 91% growth is freight tonnage on rail and on roads, okay? There's actually 96% growth in tonnage on roadways and about 69% growth in rail tonnage, which is important. The more you can get on rail, the less you get off the roads, right? So that's a very, those are the sort of the numbers. One of the numbers, though, I like to share is the cost of congestion. So congestion has an impact to the bottom line, right, which usually gets passed on to the customer. We went back to 2015 and identified in 2015 the cost of congestion to freight only, not us as commuters, but to freight, averaged about $14.4 million a day. Okay, when you project to 2050 without making investments, that number goes to $33.3 million a day to the cost of doing business. And so, as you can see, about a little over 2x times increased cost without making investments. That's why this $641 million new program will absolutely help us to start making those investments that we desperately need to do. On this slide and graphic, you can see back in 2020, had the House and Senate Joint Study Committee that started looking at freight. We followed up with that with another study committee. There's been several study committees. And then the Planning Division has put together some wonderful plans as well for things like the Coastal Empire Study, looking at Effingham, Bullock, Bryan, and Chatham counties out to the year 2050. Looking at the investments that need to be made there. Things like the I-85 Planning and Environmental Linkage Study. That's I-85 from Spaghetti Junction up through Gwinnett County. Focused on that. Troup County, they're doing a study now for Troup County and the growth that they're having. 365 up in Hall County, where the inland port is being constructed today. Looking at that corridor of what we need to do for the future. And just last week, they also put out the 2024 Freight Plan, a business-focused planning analysis document. And so, again, what is that we need to do to go forward? So, based out of all this good planning work and all of the things that we know we need to do to focus on going forward, we'll be working with planning to prioritize what those things are, to either get started on that we are not working on, or to help deliver projects that are already in the pipeline that could be accelerated or just need funding to get the projects done. So we certainly will be in front of Chairman Jasper's Transportation Committee throughout this year talking about those very things. So, and then next, on the next slide, let me just turn to airport aid. There is no change in Amendment 24. But Vice Chair Smith asked a question at Joint Appropriations as well. Didn't know his situation coming in today, and certainly my thoughts are with him. But I just wanted to show a little bit of airport aid. He asked a question about airport aid and sort of where did we stand there. This is a 5-year look back, if you will, at budgets for airport aid. In FY24, we've deployed the $26.3 million to pull down about $95 million of federal aviation dollars. And so, which also has a local match of $14.4 million. So we use the federal aviation, we're a state block grant state, which means we administer those FAA dollars to local airports. They turn in their priority list, and then we select the projects based on criteria, and then work to deploy those grant funds. In 25, we had over 400 projects submitted that were over $400 and something million. So we're working on the 25 list now to pare that down to our budget, and the budget for 25 is the same, $26.3 million. But just wanted to throw that out since he asked that question too, of sort of where airport aid stood in this budget year. And the next slide is a big thank you, and I remind this most important committee, which is my favorite because I'm in front of you right now, and it gives me the ability to have fun at Chairman Jasper's committee later, is the future is not something we enter, the future is something we create. And this budget absolutely will help us create a good future for the citizens of Georgia and all those that travel through Georgia. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for the presentation. I was reminded, as I'll ask my question first. Several years ago, New Year's Day, we had lunch with Granny. And Granny had this whole cake cornbread, fried chicken and turnips and mashed potatoes and gravy and everything is biscuits and just everything is just where it's at. You got to have black-eyed peas on New Year's Day. And we got to the end of the meal, which was absolutely fantastic. And it was asked, Granny, what's for dessert? Person asked the question should have been popped, probably. But I kind of feel that way in the question I'm fixing to ask. So, as we said in the beginning, and you said several times, and Chairman Jaspers and I have had many conversations over the last few days about this. The $1.5 billion extra is that New Year's Day meal. It is absolutely wonderful. But the one area, there again, what's for dessert? So the one area that didn't show an increase, and it jumps out on your on our tracking sheet, is capital maintenance. Mm-hmm. So I think in presentations we've had in the past, you have noted how important taking care of our roads and the capital maintenance resurfacing, how important that is for the longevity of these roads. And as I recall, and I was not here, but Abby Day was, and through 170. We pegged this capital maintenance in that $440 million back in 2015. And I was looking at the number, and it's $441 million, which is, it's still sizable. But you showed a graph. As an economist, you piqued my interest with all of the inflationary measures that you showed, and just in rough numbers, we're looking at from 2020, not 2017, from 2020, in that 50% increased cost, and some of these is 80. In light of that, and would you say that perhaps we might need a few more dollars in the bucket of capital maintenance because we cannot get across the same miles we could in 2020, much less 2017. And if we had a plan in 2017 and we're funding at the same level now, it looks to me that we might be running a little bit shy in that area. Would that be an accurate assessment?
Mr. Chairman, what did Granny do?
After I got picked up off the dirt, no.
I'm glad to see Abby didn't rear back.
I've not been off.
As noted in minute 24, there was no change. 24, we're actually using some of the previous ARTBA Corona dollars. I forget exactly what program to backfill that. In 25, we do increase back some dollars. I was trying to find that as we speak. Around 35 million, so there is a little bit of go back, but to your point is it's not keeping pace with the actual cost of doing business.
In real dollars, we're perhaps 200 million short, give or take.
You could do an inverse of the increased cost, and same thing as my routine maintenance discussion.
Yes.
The dollars just don't go as far. Mm-hmm. So we're not doing as much. Our asset conditions, that's one of the things we look at is we break every state route into a four asset condition. We're meeting our marks on two, but we're not meeting our marks, or we're meeting our marks on one, and we're just slightly below meeting our marks on the other asset condition. Is when we go out and actually rate the roads and see what the conditions are. The challenge of that is it's a flywheel effect. You've got to continue to invest, and every road is just like all of us. We all have a birthday and pick up another condition, you know. So we got to keep that flywheel moving as we invest, which is foundational. I mean, that's where you need to focus on first. So appreciate you acknowledging that reality.
Okay, 16, and I'm not really good about picking.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Commissioner. Thank you. Chairman's got me hungry with his description of Granny's dinner. You've got me feeling my age, talking about we're as close to 99 as we are to 50. Thanks for that on Monday morning. My question is kind of specific to my district, but I think it's significant for the state in a lot of ways too. I represent the neighborhoods around Treasure Bridge. And as you know, that bridge has had to be repaired. It's in the process of being repaired now because of a fire that started in an area where there's a lot of unhoused folks sleeping under bridges. This is the third time in recent memory that I have that something like this has happened around that area. That's obviously very expensive to repair. So I have a two-part question. One is, where are those funds? Is that maintenance, or is it some special fund? I'm assuming there's some federal dollars there too, perhaps. And then my second question is, while we're repairing the bridge, and it's hard to call that a Band-Aid, in a lot of ways it is, because the problem is these encampment areas. And I'm very sensitive that these are human beings, and no one would suggest we'll just wipe them out and go on about it. But at the same time, it's not helping the neighborhoods, it's not helping the state, it's not helping them to pretend like this is not an issue. And I know when I first started representing this district, I asked members of GDOT, what can we do? And I was told it's so expensive to perhaps put bricks or to patrol or to otherwise move individuals toward shelters or something that would be a better long-term solution, that's expensive. But I have to think that repairing bridges 3 times, and we have to assume that it's going to keep happening, is more expensive. So I was wondering if there are any talks going on within GDOT, and how can we help as a legislature to come up with a more long-term solution here, and what kind of cost would that be, and where would that fit? So that's a couple-part question, but I appreciate you addressing as best you can today, and then if we need to have a longer conversation, that's fine too.
Yeah, absolutely. Cheshire Bridge Road, by the way, is a City of Atlanta route, so it's not DOT's bridges, it's the city's bridges. But notwithstanding, the situation that you describe is pretty prolific here in Metro Atlanta. So we actually work pretty closely with the city to deploy the social services necessary to work to relocate and to get people into housing. We're not, as a transportation agency, adept at that. Our job is to maintain the right-of-way, and of course it does bring up a concern. When a bridge collapse or a fire or something like that happens, that is not budgeted for. That is a drain on a budget. Our routine maintenance budget is where, though, the services, as the social services work to relocate people humanely and decently the way they should, we come in out of a routine maintenance budget and then do the cleanup, and to clean up behind those locations and try to deter. We are having ongoing conversations with the City of Atlanta now, and we just had a meeting last week with our folks internally to look at other deterrents that we can try to not make it accommodating, that are still accessible. The challenge is we have to inspect bridges twice every year. Every 2 years we have to inspect bridges. So if you make it such that you can't see and inspect the things that we have to inspect for safety, is hard. So we're trying to come up with some ideas to, again, try to deter maybe some landscaping and things like that make it a little harder to navigate or want to be there. But it's a challenging situation. Again, it's sort of all hands on deck working together. And we really do rely on the city and their programs to put people in housing situations and to help that. And they're doing a lot of good things there. But it's a partnership, it's an ongoing conversation, and you know, I'll say this, it's not a city of Atlanta issue, it's a national issue. My counterparts across the nation have the similar challenges in most of the metropolitan areas, and so it's something we continue to work toward.
Thank you for the question. One of the things that you mentioned in your presentation was the transportation and freight studies. You mentioned several of them. The one constant they have is our next question. Chairman Jaspers, I think, has been on all of those. Chairman Jaspers?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I have contributed to the lot of trees being cut down. Is that what you're saying? It is. But hey, I just want to echo you real quick, Chairman Perkle. You know, last week when we saw the budget, I know in the conversations we all have had in transportation in the last few months, and especially Commissioner, have been about needing more dollars. And, you know, I think everybody in the room saw the inflation that's made it tremendous. It's just incredible what it's done and really slowing us down from keeping Georgia moving. But, you know, one thing I have a question about, this concern out in the industry, Commissioner, is it's like Chairman said on capital maintenance due to inflation. And it looks like we're going to run out of the ability to let paving contracts after the next one. I think we're doing what in February or March? Is that it? Paving?
Yes, sir. We just did our announcement for the February bids, and so
Yeah.
I think that finishes up our program. So we will have used our budget capacity, basically state and federal, as of receiving bids next month.
And so that paving would be done, I guess, in May and June, but the next letting would have been really in the prime paving time for contractors and communities all across the state. And I guess there's a concern that that's not going to get to be done. So is there any within the budget that can be backfilled, or what's the thought on this? We're just going to have to wait. What's any plans out there or thoughts about what can be done about this?
So we'll just be waiting to the fiscal year. So starting in July, we'll start re-advertising maintenance projects, and some smaller ones may be able to be done before the end of the calendar year. It's all temperature dependent, but bigger ones would probably go into start this calendar year into next calendar year as weather permits.
Sure. Mr. Chairman, that's a big problem for the committee across the state.
I agree. And it's a problem that this committee is committed to address.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And just two other little things, if I can, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
You know, you looked at, on your last slide, you know, you showed this thank you to the committee and all. You know, of course, we appreciate that. But one thing that we were talking about, some of us the other day, was that you, state GDOT, the state, all of us, many times don't get credit in local communities for the work we do. And I think some of it's just because we're so busy, but the communication, I'd love to see we do a project, let's say in Hart County or Pickens County or Turner County, some kind of public relations effort. And I was probably going to give Josh Waller more to do. We recognize you too, Josh. We didn't get to do that earlier. We thank you for what you do, so that we can get a little bit more bang for our buck. And that little logo you've got there, your tax dollars at work. I hope we have a little bit more conversation this year about how we can let the chairman get credit from something that's going on in his county, either in the paper or the sign or something like that. I think it's important that it makes us all look good, because I mean, the future of us is we're going to need more dollars. And I guess it's wherever we get them is going to be tough, and then determining that. But we need that public relations where people see where those dollars are coming from. They're not magic, and how they end up in their county. I appreciate what's working on that.
Absolutely. We'll work with our district engineers. Each have a communications officer that can reach out on those kind of announcements. And they push stuff out already, but we certainly can engage with each of you. Mm-hmm.
Representative Campbell.
Yeah, it seemed to me, and I'm sure that the numbers I'm going to ask you are in here, but all the numbers basically pretty much was increase due to inflation, due to increase in cost of everything we do and all that. But I guess my question is, we're also increasing the number of trucks that are on the road every year. Is that right? More and more?
Yes, sir.
Is that baked into these numbers also?
This is a recognition and a start for that growth in freight volume and traffic volume as Georgia continues to grow. Again, by 2050, another 2-point-something million people, coming to Georgia. So our projections show continued increased traffic, despite trying to get people out of cars. Sometimes it will continue to grow, but the freight numbers absolutely do continue to grow. The freight plan that planning put out, or the freight analysis they put out last week, has some information in there about what kind of investment needs to be made on an annual basis to try to combat that, to keep the travel times similar or reasonable as we continue to grow out to 2050. So this is, I would say, doesn't address it 100%, but it certainly is a wonderful, wonderful start of recognition. Even that new program, I might add, Mr. Chair, that's a recognition of that work that was done by the Joint Study Committee, is that we've got a dedicated program going forward to focus just on that truck volume growth that's going to happen due to the success of our state.
Thank you.
Chairman Jay Collins.
Thank you. And again, I just want to reiterate some of the comments that have been made by those here about what a great job that you do for us in leading this agency. I've never called or texted you where you didn't get back with me, and I certainly appreciate that. I also want to give you kudos to the formula that you have given us in this handout here about the Transit Trust Fund. Out where I live, we used to be a little more rural than we are now out in West Georgia and Carroll County. And, there have been some resistance about transit programs. But since we're talking about grandma here, Mr. Chairman, the fact of the matter is that some grandmas don't have anybody to take them to the doctor, take them to the grocery store. Some Uncle Joes who didn't have children don't have people that will care for them and transport them to places they need to go. So I think that is a great formula that you have worked out there, and I just want to say kudos to you for what you've done on that.
Thank you, Representative Collins. And it's credit doesn't go to me; credit goes to all the men and women at GDOT. So thank you for that.
So speaking of all the men and women at GDOT, so with increased funding comes increased responsibilities. We have more projects to let. We have more capital things to do. We've got some great employees at the DOT, absolutely, led by a great leader. Do we have currently the bandwidth in personnel and project managers to administer these additional projects that we have? Because so we're going from 35 projects per manager to whatever it is, 42, or more complex projects. Do we have the bandwidth? Talked to a mom this morning whose son just graduated from Georgia Tech as an engineer that is looking for work. Is DOT hiring?
Yes. I'll take a name and a phone number. So to answer your question, is we're building back. Just a year and a half ago, our staff levels got down to right under 3,600 employees. We need to be 4,000 minimal, maybe really more like 4,100. We are right at 3,900 today. And I want to commend and thank the House and the Senate and the governor for the last few years of these COLAs that have been given has absolutely helped with retention. And also, Mr. Chairman, even through your committee, some of the things we've done in the past few years to help with salaries. And I mentioned the program delivery budget program, which will help us attract and retain people such that we can. Now, we supplement our employees heavily with consultant resources. In fact, that's a big part of our program. On design, we're 90% outsourced. In right-of-way acquisition, we're over 50% outsourced. And so we rely on our consultant partners to help us deliver, but we do have to manage that, and we have to be good stewards of taxpayers' dollars to make sure that we manage effectively and efficiently of those dollars while delivering a bigger work program, and we can do it. I'm reminded of the old NASA saying there is failure is not an option.
So I quote Granny and you quote NASA. That is how it works. So any other questions of the committee? I'd like to thank you. As Chairman Collins mentioned, your leadership. Oftentimes, you get the calls when we kind of get upset or but publicly here, I'd like to say, of all the comments of the people that travel around the Southeast, and they say, closing my eyes, I can tell the difference when I come in the state of Georgia. And it's testimony to our great employees that we have at GDOT, and I just appreciate that. So with nothing else, for the good of the committee, that's it.
Thank you.